In the year 1700, India's share in the world's economy was an astounding 27% more than all of Europe combined. 250 years later, India's share had plummeted to less than 3%, and its people were left impoverished. What happened? Strap in, adventurers, as we dive into a dark and tumultuous history. Welcome to 18th century India. In 1707 CE, the death of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb sent the empire into a decades-long downward spiral. In his wake, an endless parade of weak princelings vied for power, forcing themselves upon the peacock throne. With the Mughal Empire teetering on the brink of collapse, regional powers jostled for supremacy. Land grabs, title claims, infighting, and betrayals abounded. India was vulnerable. The situation grew so precarious that, in 1739, Persian Emperor Nader Shah invaded northern India and sacked Delhi. During this period of chaos, the British sensed an opportunity. Leveraging their unique advantages as a foreign power, they bribed, fought, and maneuvered their way into a dominant position in the subcontinent. India was no stranger to foreign aggression, but the British were unlike any who had come before. They were not like Nader Shah, who looted and departed, nor were they like the Huns, who, despite shedding Gupta blood, eventually became part of Indian society. No, the British were different. They viewed India as an inexhaustible gold mine, a resource to be endlessly exploited. By the time India achieved independence in 1947, its native institutions were demolished, its economy deindustrialized, its trade networks severed, and its people more deeply divided by caste and creed. In just 200 years of colonial rule, the India that had once inspired the world was systematically unmade. The halcyon days of India were over. She had been drained of her wealth, and her energies constrained by a system of deliberate misrule. The British exploitation of India was so extreme that the American scholar Will Durant described it as the greatest crime in all of history. But what was India like before this colonial devastation? In the 19th century, American writer J.T. Sunderland wrote about the India the British encountered when they first arrived. India was a far greater industrial and manufacturing nation than any in Europe or Asia. Her textile goods were famous all over the civilized world, as were her exquisite jewelry and precious stones, her pottery, porcelains and ceramics, and her fine works in metal iron, steel, silver, and gold. She had architecture equal in beauty to any in the world. She had great merchants, businessmen, bankers, and financiers. She was not only a great shipbuilding nation, but had commerce and trade that extended to all civilized countries. While this may sound like effusive praise, the historical record confirms that pre-colonial India was indeed a dominant manufacturing economy. India was a textile superpower for most of its history. The subcontinent boasted numerous textile hubs. Coastal Andhra specialized in block printing, while Gujarat and Bengal were renowned for their high-quality woven fabrics. Global demand for Indian textiles was immense by the mid-18th century. India commanded an extraordinary 25% share of the global textile trade. This flourishing textile industry had a ripple effect across the economy. The popularity of Indian textiles supported stable international distribution networks, which other artisans leveraged to sell their goods worldwide at reduced costs. Consequently, a wide range of industries thrived alongside the textile sector. International trade was predominantly conducted along maritime routes, and India's shipbuilding industry became a powerhouse. Many Indian ports, including Dhaka, Masulipatam, Surat, Calicut, and Quilon, were heavily involved in shipbuilding. Entire rural communities contributed to the production and processing of materials for ship construction. Quality was paramount. The Bengali merchant fleet of the early 17th century, for example, consisted of nearly 5,000 ships, each capable of carrying up to 500 tons of goods. These ships, crafted by skilled Bengali artisans, featured intricate wood, iron, and brass fittings. A British maritime observer once remarked that Indian vessels combined elegance and utility, serving as models of superior craftsmanship. Merchant contracts reveal that Bengali ships were significantly more durable than their English counterparts. While Bengali ships had an average lifespan exceeding 20 years, English ships rarely lasted more than 12 years, a striking difference. India was also a pioneer in the global steel industry. As early as the 6th century CE, Indian blacksmiths along the Malabar coast and in the Deccan were producing Wootz steel, known in the West as Damascus steel, primarily for export. This high-quality steel was in high demand among Arab and European officers who regularly imported Indian blades. These weapons were not only robust and highly functional in war, but also considered symbols of high status in times of peace due to their exceptional craftsmanship. Even with just these examples, it is evident that India was a manufacturing powerhouse and a thriving exporter of high-quality goods to global markets. But how did the British dismantle all of this? The British strategy was clear: to make the Indian nation entirely subservient to their own economic interests. Once in power, the British systematically altered the structure of India's economy to suit their goals. The first step was dismantling native industries. They established a legal monopoly over Indian textiles and cut off export markets, instantly disrupting long-standing trade networks. Having positioned themselves as the sole buyers of Indian textiles, the British manipulated the payment system. Instead of paying with foreign currency, they used tax revenues extracted from Indian citizens. This caused India's economy to stagnate, prices to collapse, and skilled artisans, once the backbone of India's vibrant economy, to fall into poverty and severe restrictions. This was just the beginning. British manufacturers lobbied their government to completely eliminate competition from Indian textiles. Even with imposed restrictions, Indian products remained superior and difficult to compete with. In response, East India Company soldiers were sent to destroy Indian looms. According to various accounts, they even broke the thumbs of weavers to prevent them from continuing their craft. To ensure the textile industry could not recover or adapt, the British imposed an extraordinarily high tariff of 80%. This created an economic trap. Exporting Indian goods to the UK became unviable, and India was prohibited from selling to other countries. Similar restrictions were imposed on nearly every branch of Indian manufacturing. India was reduced to being a mere exporter of raw materials, like cotton and metal ore. The British processed these materials into finished goods in their factories and sold them back to Indians at inflated prices. As one British politician candidly stated, "We conquered India as a market for British goods. I am not so hypocritical as to claim that we hold India for the Indians." The colonial process of deindustrialization was so thorough that by 1947, Only 0.7% of India's population was employed in manufacturing. Displaced artisans and workers were left with no choice but to turn to agriculture for survival. Dr. Charles Hall noted, India's population has been forced back to the soil because Britain's discriminatory policies have destroyed every branch of native manufacture. Rural wages plummeted to historic lows, and the land itself could not support the sudden influx of unemployed workers. Poor harvests and droughts further worsened the situation, leading to widespread famines and mass poverty. With most Indians now converted into peasant cultivators, the British sought to extract even more revenue. Farmers were taxed at exorbitant rates, ranging from 50% to 80% of their gross income, calculated even before harvests. The result? Farmers often owed more in taxes than they earned in income. The British knew how harsh these policies were and openly admitted to imposing the highest tax rates in the world, more than 3 times higher than those under Indian rulers. Astonishingly, they even boasted about it. Indian taxpayers were forced to cover the losses. As a result, railway construction in India became extremely inefficient. Every mile of railway cost £18,000 to construct, compared to just £2,000 per mile in the United States. This enormous difference was due to the reliance on British manufacturers for all components: steel, wagons, gears, and engines. Indians were deliberately excluded from manufacturing alternatives as restrictions imposed by the British government prevented local competition. The primary purpose of the railways was not to benefit India, but to facilitate the extraction of its resources. The railways enabled the British to transport massive quantities of agricultural produce, raw materials, and other goods to ports for export. This efficiency in resource extraction exacerbated famines, as food and other essentials were shipped out of India during periods of drought, leaving millions to starve. Over the course of British rule in India, an estimated 35 million people died in preventable famines. This number dwarfs the death toll of many other historical atrocities, including those under Stalin or Mao, and is 5 times greater than the Holocaust. British policies were directly responsible for these deaths, as they prioritized profit over human lives. Food exports continued unabated, even during the worst famine years. Dr. Charles Hall observed, India starves so that its annual tax revenue to England may not be diminished by $1. There is plenty of grain in India. The trouble is that the people have been ground down until they are too poor to buy it. The British government adopted a policy of non-intervention during famines, claiming that markets would naturally correct themselves. This was deeply ironic, as British intervention and market manipulation were the root causes of the famines. Efforts by Indian and foreign humanitarians to provide relief were often obstructed by British authorities, who were more concerned about preserving their image than saving lives. One British officer chillingly described the horrors of famine in his own words. Scores of corpses were tumbled into old wells because the deaths were too numerous for the relatives to perform funeral rites. Mothers sold their children for a single meal. Husbands flung their wives into ponds to escape the torment of seeing them perish from hunger. But amid these scenes of death, the British government in India was unmoved. Newspapers were persuaded into silence, and orders were given to civilians. Do not acknowledge that people are dying of hunger.